According to the Oxford Dictionary, the definition of discipline is the practice of training people to obey rules or a code of behavior using punishment to correct disobedience. Does this sound like discipline to you? What about this? Or what about this?
Turn around. Turn around. I told you not to be doing this.
Do all these audios sound like discipline to you? If you look up the definition of discipline, Oxford's version is the very first to show up. The synonyms tied to this definition are words like control, rule, authority, and order. Right beneath it are other credible dictionary definitions. The one that stood out to me the most was from Merriam-Webster. The reason it stood out to me was how discipline is described as a way to enforce desirable behavior and perfecting moral character. To impose your will onto another, to bring them under your control. And then it became clear the real intentions behind those who use this form of coercion. To discipline is to violate the will of another. While the definitions of these words don't explicitly say it's speaking about children, a lot of them provide examples in the use of the word through the context of child-rearing practices. Referencing Oxford's definition again, let's examine the use of the word obedience. Obedience, as written also by Oxford, is compliance with an order, request, or law, or submission to another's authority. Again, this definition doesn't explicitly say it's referring to child rearing, but it's implied through Google search engine photos. Obedience as a virtue is also taught from the space of religion. Some might even say indoctrination. Children of all kinds, even those whose families aren't devout Christians, are often subjected to biblical standards for what is considered good or bad behavior. This is a huge issue within itself, considering not everyone shares the same beliefs. Religions have a very tainted history of using the threat of an all-knowing man who punishes those for disobeying the laws of the Bible. The looming fear of eternal damnation for throwing erasers at your classmate or yelling at your parents has definitely done the job of helping children change their behavior in a healthy manner. This is sarcasm, by the way. The separation of church and state has been pivotal in addressing issues of organized religion, guiding the decisions institutions make in regard to following biblical practices outside of the church. It was mentioned by Thomas Jefferson in a philosophical sense when the Constitution was being drafted in the US. But like many things that are intertwined with culture, laws have never completely stopped the use of organized religion being used to justify harsh disciplinary actions against those who insult the Word of God or disrespect the church. Common Bible verses used to peddle obedience to children are Ephesians, such as, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right," and "Honor thy mother and father." Interestingly enough, these same parents always seem to forget the verse about not angering their children on purpose. But what do I know? Another way religion was used to abuse groups of people was during chattel slavery. The weaponization of the Bible was a common tactic used to justify inhumane levels of abuse that kidnapped Black victims and other indigenous people had to suffer from at the hands of extremely violent forms of white supremacy. Black people were seen as dirty, godless people who needed to be guided by white saviors in order to deliver them from their animalistic nature.
The so-called Slave Bible, remarkable not for what's in it, but for what's not.
So about 90% of the Old Testament's been removed and about 50% of the New Testament's been removed. To put it another way, a normal King James Version has 1,189 chapters in it. The Slave Bible has only 232.
Missing are chapters and verses that might have encouraged uprisings. Book of Exodus, redacted. No story of Moses demanding Pharaoh, "Let my people go." Gone is Galatians, and the verse, "There is neither bond nor free, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus." And no Jeremiah, "Woe unto him that useth his neighbor's service without wages."
What they've left in are verses such as Ephesians 6:5, which is the famous verse, "Slaves, be obedient to your master."
Random fact. Did you know the reason we have a standard diet of 3 meals a day is because white colonizers believed the various eating volumes of indigenous people was too close to the behaviors of animals in nature? Well, you do now. Back to talking about chattel slavery. Black victims were brutally tortured and murdered as a way to force them into extreme submission under the ruling of their white kidnappers. In fact, corporal punishment was born from slavery. Yes, that's right. The use of a leather belt is the modern-day version of a white supremacist whip. The action of hitting someone repeatedly with a thick piece of leather, so much so that it can leave welts, bruises, and even cause bleeding, is a child-rearing practice derived from one of the most inhumane points of human history. Even the term whupping is a variation of the word whip. Other forms of torture includes forcing children into extreme solitude, denying them food, water, or shelter, verbal abuse, and weaponizing the system of policing. A prime example of the last point mentioned is the show Beyond Scared Straight, a show where children and adolescents who are categorized as juvenile delinquents are subjected to verbal, physical, and psychological abuse from adults who are imprisoned. The purpose of the show is to incite fear in these children and teens to hopefully steer them away from a future like those who are jailed. How successful has this been? Well, besides unforgettable memes, not very helpful at all in addressing the root causes for why a child could turn out in such a way. In fact, it only made them worse. And it doesn't stop there. The policing system in itself is also derived from chattel slavery. In fact, police were hired slave catchers. The modern usage of dogs, guns, and other forms of police brutality are integral parts of a system designed to use tactics of obedience and submission against those who are systematically disenfranchised. And parents model their behaviors after this. When their abuse at home no longer works because the child has grown resilient, they may resort to using government systems to criminalize their child. Throwing a child into juvenile detention centers, sending them away to a camp with harsh punitive practices, or in extreme cases, completely disowning their child and giving up parental privileges to the state. On the other end, a child can petition to become free of their parents or caregivers legally through the process of emancipation. The legal age for emancipation varies from state to state, but special cases are allowed for 16-year-olds. My focus is especially on Black families because of our unique history with corporal abuse being tied directly to the generational trauma our ancestors suffered. Black parents are also known for being the harshest of all races when it comes to corporal punishment. One of the main reasons abusive parents, especially Black parents, will say is their purpose for using such brutality against their children is because the world isn't kind, and it's to prepare them for the abuse they will suffer later in life due to racism, sexism, and other societal ills. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it is fictitious. It makes absolutely zero sense to shoot your child first just so they can become familiar with how it feels to be shot. And becoming their first abuser only ensures that they associate abuse with love or care. For example, a woman staying in an abusive relationship because her partner was upset at something she did. After all, she knew it was wrong to talk back after being caught in a lie. The truth becomes subjective. Now, replace partner with parent, and you can see the full effect of what happens when you prime your child to be accepting of abuse, humiliation, or violence. All this does is raise the chances of your child being brutalized by others as they grow and create relationships that model the way their caregivers raised them. Let me ask you a few questions. Who gets to determine what is bad? Who gets to determine what is morally incorrect? Who has the power to punish others and who punishes them? Are parents the only people allowed to discipline as they see fit? What about the police or tyrannical governments? What about lawmakers? How much different would our world look if everyone blindly followed orders? Unfortunately, we don't have to speculate at all, because this is our reality. The rights of humanity, on a legal level I should clarify, are constantly being placed on a chopping block. Debates about bodily autonomy and choice over one's self-expression might ring a few bells if you've been paying attention. The debate of who has power to make change isn't always fair or righteous, and what one person or one group deems as undesirable behavior may not be true for another. But at least with this, adults still have some kind of power in numbers via protesting, funding, or voting. Children do not. They aren't allowed to vote or attend government meetings in regard to their rights. They depend on us to amplify their voices and to be their advocates. So, where do we go from here? Now that we've discussed a handful of ways this form of discipline can negatively impact a child, how can we help parents who are at wit's end and don't actually want to perpetuate harm in their home? What tools do we have to solve this seemingly impossible task of raising a child in a healthy manner? I am so glad you asked. Gentle parenting has become more and more popular among parents who seek to intentionally raise their children in a kind, loving, and healthy environment. While this style of parenting has been heavily tied to white families only, in the last 10 decades, Black families have begun to practice this form of parenting more and more. What is gentle parenting? Let's define it. According to the Cleveland Clinic, gentle parenting is the goal of raising a confident, independent, and happy child through empathy, respect, and understanding, and setting healthy boundaries. And instead of focusing on punishment or reward systems, gentle parenting focuses on improving a child's self-awareness and understanding of their own behavior. Sounds reasonable, yes? Not to parents who believe children need to be beaten for being children. As the movement for gentle parenting has found its way to the internet in more recent years on social platforms like TikTok and Instagram, the pushback against it has increased as well. And a lot of myths about this style of parenting are circulated as a way to discredit it, effectively continuing abusive practices that actually perpetuate harm. One common myth circulated by gentle parenting naysayers is the belief that being gentle means being passive or becoming a doormat to a child's needs or wants. The word gentle has become weaponized to describe what is actually called permissive parenting. Permissive parenting is when a parent has loose boundaries and loose structure while raising a child. The parent isn't very active or treats their child like an adult equal instead of someone they have to protect and guide intentionally. This is not gentle parenting at all, and it's a common misconception spread online through video content posted by parents. Most of the videos are a parent's poor attempt at asking their child to complete a task by using a baby voice. After repeating the request with no response from their child, they instead resort back to yelling, berating, or threatening the child to move them out of fear.
Can you do me a favor? Can you pick up your cookie? Can you pick up the cookie? Can you pick up the cookie? May you please pick up the cookie? Can you pick up that cookie? Can you please pick up the 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 cookie? I don't like gentle parenting. Because if I would have said, now go pick up that goddamn cookie. One time, see? One time.
After repeating the request with no response from their child, they instead resort back to yelling, berating, or threatening the child to move them out of fear.
Please get out the cabinet. Get your motherfucking ass!
So gentle parenting isn't talking to your child like, oh, little Billy, you gotta stop. Stop that little bit. That's not gentle parenting. If I need a kid to do something, I'm gonna walk up, hey, little Billy, this is what we're doing now. I'm gonna say what you should be doing as opposed to what you shouldn't be doing. This is because the brain focuses on the things that you're telling it to focus on. So when you say, don't look at this gray folder, you're going to look at the gray folder, even though I told you not to, because it's in the face. It's what you're focusing. But if I were to say, hey, look at me, you're now going to look at me versus looking at the folder. So when you're yelling at your child, it's not because they're not focused on that. It's because you scared them so much that they're focusing on you. Instead of doing that, just say what they should be focusing on, which is you, or walk up to them and remove the distractor completely, getting on their level, moving them out of the way. Hey, we're doing this now. It's that simple.
The fear of the wild, white child throwing a tantrum in public, humiliating their parents, is a common stereotype used in Black and Hispanic communities to function as an example for what their children are never allowed to do. An episode from the Black comedy animation The Boondocks illustrates this in the 3rd episode of the 1st season. A white mother is shown dealing with emotional turmoil because her son is destroying the grocery store during a tantrum. One of the main characters, known as Granddad, is modeled after a stereotypical Black male grandfather. He interrupts the mother's cries to console her by teaching her how to beat the little boy. He instructs her on how to do it, and the mother furiously leaps to assault. A crowd watches with joy, smiling ear to ear as the child is beaten, symbolizing society's current acceptance and joy in seeing a wild animal be tamed. Are we seeing the trend here? Children are people. Radical sentence, I know. But seriously, they are humans. Lots of people have children with the idea that they can control how they will behave. It's a false sense of control. It's fictitious. It's not real. The reason parents who practice corporal punishment believes it works is because the child stops doing the behavior out of fear. but it doesn't teach them anything past that point. Once the threat of harm is removed, the child will once again do what they wish. And this is what builds criminals, because now they've learned that hitting, smacking, punching, yelling, and destroying was the way to get what you want out of others. I leave off with this. Discipline does not teach. Being patient, remaining curious, and providing a safe space for learning is where change and growth happens. Abusing your child by yelling, shaming, hitting, smacking, spanking, or isolating them does not mean they learn that a behavior needs to change. All it does is instill fear, shame, guilt, and a hefty amount of mental health issues that will directly conflict with their ability to grow. What you do to your child becomes an example for what they are to expect from others who they view as authority. This could be their romantic partner, their friends, their teachers, or other caregivers. What you teach them gives them the blueprint on whether or not they too will become victims of domestic violence, shrink their self-expression and accomplishments, how they communicate their needs or wants, or if they become the abusers themselves. Every parent has the power to change their approach, cultivate a healthy environment for growth, and seek to understand instead of to destroy. And with every paper, video, or speech I create for this very painful conversation, I will nudge you one step closer to becoming greater today. You've already taken the first step by watching this video, and I thank you. Thank you for striving to be different than what you may have previously known. You are already one step closer to healing the relationship between you, your child, their peers, and ultimately, the world.